Hi everyone. Hi, welcome today to our conversation. And I'm going to do a little introduction here before we focus on our guest for today. Thank you all for joining us. I know, it's the middle of the workday, and the good thing is that we're going to have this live on YouTube, or we're having this live on YouTube now, but we're going to have it in the future with lots of ways to access this interview. So we're super excited to be having this conversation. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sally Haldorson, and I'm the managing director of Porchlight Book Company. We're located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we sell, customize, and ship books in bulk quantities all over the world in support of authors, publishers, and organizations. So if you are interested in bringing the book we're featuring today into your company or your group, please visit porchlightbooks.com or check out the link in the comments and in the chat. And we will be happy to help you get this wonderful book into your organization, into your hands. Okay. What if achieving your goals and realizing your dreams felt more possible and less painful? That's the gift Amina AlTai's new book, The Ambition Trap, gives to its readers. Let's set the scene. You're an ambitious person. Probably most of the people on this live stream would consider themselves to be ambitious people. And you like that about yourself. You want to be an ambitious person, but your ambition has required you to make sacrifices. You're overworked because you say yes to every request your boss brings to you because you want to be considered for a promotion. You are a freelance consultant and you're away from your family in the evenings because you have joined too many boards, volunteered for too many organizations, and signed up for too many networking groups in order to build your profile and contacts list. You're an artist, but also have a full-time job to pay the bills, and you're up late at night and up early in the morning in order to practice your art, but it leaves you foggy-headed and inattentive at work, risking your employment and maybe your safety when you're driving. You're someone who puts pressure on herself to be the best at everything, at every relationship, and to give and give and give, while you forget that your primary caregiving relationship needs to be with yourself. You are you, and you want a big life, and you want to strive and see what you're capable of. But the strain from the striving is making you anxious, is making you sick, but you know no other way to achieve your dreams. And they seem farther and farther away the more you push. So I said all this to all of the yous I mentioned because this book is for you. This book is for you to find a healthy relationship with your ambition, to not feel trapped by it. Amina helps us figure out if our ambition has been driven by a system, by expectation, by comparison, by the emptiness caused by our needs not having been met, and how to redefine and re-identify our ambition as driven by purpose, by our singular genius, by our devotion to ourselves so that we feel less trapped and less exhausted, by our dreams, because our dreams should fuel us. And they should feel close and possible. And Amina is going to help us find that potential in ourselves. And that's why I call this book a gift. And I'm so honored to be able to thank Amina AlTai for giving it to us in person today. Amina, welcome. It's a bit of a lead-in, but I had to go all in because the book is so great.
Oh, Sally, thank you so much. And I deeply appreciate the lead-in because that was rolling out the red carpet for me. That was so kind. And I was jotting down some of the things that you said, like the strain from striving. I just love that alliteration too.
I think I'm so excited to dig into the book, but let's go first. So what we know is that you are an executive coach, you're a leadership trainer, and you're a chronic illness advocate. And you're an author. So congratulations on the book, which just came out last week, I think it was.
Yeah, last Tuesday.
And, you've probably been going and going and going, and this is a dream of yours that you've met. So will you tell us a little bit more about what you do and what led you to writing this book?
Yes, I love this question. So I'm an executive coach, and I work with everybody from Fortune 100 leaders to VC-backed founders to Olympians and every other amazing human in between. And I'm able to do this work because I was on my own journey for so long and met this work so deeply. So prior to being an executive coach, I worked in marketing and brand management for over a decade. And I jokingly now say I was working from my zone of misery, not my zone of genius. And so I had this spectacular crash and burn that I talk about in the book, where I'm in my late 20s and, working really hard and deeply boundaryless and codependent and all the things. And I eventually burn out and I develop 2 autoimmune diseases. And it happens in this very sort of spectacularly dramatic fashion where my doctor calls and says, you have to go to the hospital now. Otherwise, you are days away from organ failure. And that was my stop moment, I call it, right? Where you just have to look at your whole life and say, what am I doing? Because clearly it's not working. And from there, I went on what I call my eat, pray, love year, where I was still finding myself, right? So I went to coaching, I studied mindfulness, I went to nutrition school, all these things just to feel better in my own life. And at the end of a couple of year journey, I thought, you know what? I want to mitigate the learning curve for others. And so I put together a curriculum. And I've been in private practice coaching for the last 10 years. And it's really interesting because as a coach, especially, you attract what you are. So I have a front row seat to these deeply ambitious people. And I was noticing some people having a really flourishing relationship with their ambition. And I was noticing others that were a bit more like me and had a bit more of a painful relationship to ambition. And maybe their body was taking a hit or their relationships were. And so over the course of a couple of years, I just started to study it. And then I eventually came up with a framework that is now the book.
That's fantastic. I think one thing that I'd like to share first off with people who have yet to read the book, or just validate for the people who have, the book takes a very holistic perspective on ambition and ambition's like role in our natural role in our lives, I think. And as you said, you're an executive coach, so there is the sort of leadership and business and work, and it's not only like within your work to make money, but also work in terms of what you want to accomplish in life, but then also takes into account health, both physical and mental, but then also has a spiritual aspect that runs as a thread throughout the book. Can you tell us a little bit how you decided to take on the challenge of including all of ourselves in this book? And then also what motivates you to be talking on all of those different levels?
Yes. Well, when I first designed my coaching and my curriculum, it really touched on all of those areas, because what I knew from my own life is that you can't separate career and well-being. You can't separate well-being and mindset. You can't separate mindset and career. You can't separate nervous system and career, right? Part of the experience that I had where my body expressed autoimmune disease, yes, I have a genetic sensitivity to it. Yes, environment plays a role. And also my career played a role in that too. And so for me, it just felt like such a big conversation. I started that conversation before it was a popular one. And then, fast forward to the pandemic and we see so many people talking about burnout, right? Higher rates of burnout than we've ever seen before. And so for me, it felt like these conversations are intrinsically tied, and we have to look at mindset, well-being, nervous system, all of these other tools with the same diligence that we look at our career planning and our growth strategies. Otherwise, what are we doing? Otherwise, our careers aren't sustainable. We're in it for a season and not a lifetime. And most of us have to be in our careers for a lifetime and not just a season. And so for me, I couldn't separate them. Yes, like literally my own body was like, we're unavailable for separating them. So when I sat down to write the book and design the work, they're so intrinsically linked for me.
I think that it's easier for us to tend to one aspect of our lives at a time, right? Like you take out your hammer and nails and you're like, I'm going to fix this one thing. And you don't realize that all of the focus that goes into fixing that one thing actually then puts a strain on so many other things. And that's a little bit what we're talking about here in terms of ambition, as well as we pursue something that means something to us or that we think we are supposed to accomplish, then we are stealing from so many other aspects of our lives. But I want to start out with, or I want to go on to something actually pretty basic, and just for everybody to understand where you're coming from with the book is, can you define ambition for us? And then sort of give us this, what do we think ambition is versus what is ambition actually?
Yes. Most of us believe in sort of the dominant paradigm, and what we mostly see in the world and what we've been taught culturally is that ambition is more for more's sake all the time, regardless of the cost. And I was unavailable for that, right? The cost was too high. And I was seeing that with my clients too, that they just didn't want to pay that entry fee, right? It was just too high for most of us. And so I set out to redefine ambition, because actually ambition at its root, what I think is, it's simply a desire for more life. It's a desire for growth, a desire to unfold. And that's so beautiful. And it's encoded in every living thing on the planet, right? From a blade of grass to our pets. They all have, their cells are like, we have a desire for growth, a desire to unfold. And as humans, we're the only ones that have a choice in how we can direct that growth, which is so magical, right? Such a gift. But we also live in a world that makes ambition right for some people and wrong for others. And that's what I wanted to rewrite the script on.
That's really fascinating. Can you talk a little bit more about that ambition being right for some and not for others?
Yes. When I started to do the research, what I saw was a lot of us experience what is known as an ambition penalty. So ambitious men, and the studies are done in the gender binary. So that's the language that I will share with you. So ambitious men are seen as strong and powerful. Ambitious women are seen as too much. And though we enter the workforce with more or less the same rates of ambition, men are rewarded for their ambition. It's seen as a detractor in women. Ambitious women that negotiate their salaries are seen as demanding and aggressive. And then the most ambitious cohort in the workplace are actually women of color, and they experience the most headwinds and the most microaggressions. So culturally speaking, we have this idea about who gets to be ambitious and who doesn't get to be ambitious. So it's one of those culturally complex, politically loaded words that either highlights our benefits or our drawbacks, depending on who is being labeled. And that's what I think we dramatically need to rewrite.
Can you talk a little bit about how the system, depending on what system we're talking about, whether it's societal or political or an organizational system, compels us to be ambitious in a way that is unnatural to us?
Yes. I think capitalism as a system is a tricky one. I think a lot of us would agree with that. A lot of us feel a lot of financial insecurity, right? I was reading some data recently that even people that are higher up on the socioeconomic ladder that might be in management positions or C-suite positions are feeling economic pressure, let alone the rest of us. And so that financial precarity causes people to overwork because they're worried about the fallout if they don't, but then we're in a system that rewards us for the overworking. So how do you get away from the overworking? Which is why I think that overworking and burnout are actually systemic and economic problems more so than they are individual failings.
What's interesting about the book, though, is what I like about it is the fact that while you acknowledge the systemic causes, you also, and you do not advocate, which many books have in the past, that it's up to us as people only to push back against the system, which just creates more stress and more we're putting the onus on the person to not only create a bigger life for themselves, but also change the system, which is a lot to ask of anyone. But then you talk about the self also quite a bit, and you don't sort of let us off the hook, right? Because you also have to do the work yourself, regardless of the system. And then what I love about how you sort of close the book is saying that when you work on yourself, you are affecting the system. You are creating change. Can you explain that probably a little bit better than I just did?
I think you did a beautiful job. When I describe what the ambition trap is, I talk about it. It's when we are chasing success from a place of pain, pressure, and validation, and our ambitions coming from a core wound. But there's a mindset piece, but there's also a systemic piece. And again, it felt really important to talk about both of these at the same time, because Listen, I'm a coach and I love the self-help world. And I see a lot of books that download the change onto our individual shoulders. And I feel like that's a teensy bit problematic, right? Because we're saying the problem is always you, fix you and everything will be okay. And a part of that's true, right? Like when I look at my own story, I'm like, yeah, I was operating from my core wounds. I was chasing the shiny objects. I had a lot of stuff to do on my side of the street.
Right.
And I'm also a woman of color with invisible illness operating in a system that maybe doesn't reward people with an identity like mine. And so we have to talk about those things at the very same time. And while I feel like it's a whole body of work to talk about, well, what does the system change look like? What I believe is that it does start with us. And if I show up differently and I'm looking at my core wounds, then the people around me show up differently, right? We're all in a dance together. So if I take one step, then people will take a step with me. And so I think that's one of the most powerful things that we can do is work on ourselves, look at our own core wounds, and invite people on the journey by virtue of just being in our orbit. And hopefully the system shifts right alongside us too.
All right, let's dig into some of the language that you just used, which I think is really unique to the book. I'm just going to combine two questions here that I had, and we can go into it. You make a distinction between painful ambition and purposeful ambition. And knowing the difference can help us resolve the conflicted and sometimes self-abusive relationship we have with ambition. Mm-hmm. And of course, painful ambition is related to these wounds that you are talking about. And I find that the use of that word to be really fascinating, mm-hmm. and your decision to use that word. So that's a big question here, is to say painful ambition, stemming from our wounds, what is the alternative, and how did you choose this sort of rubric?
Yes, I love this question. Something that was really important to me is like, I didn't want to make anybody wrong in the language that I was using. So, we were kind of playing with ideas of like healthy versus unhealthy ambition, but I didn't want it to come off as righteous, right? Because this is a perfectly typical rite of passage for all of us. Every single human on the planet will have core wounds. So painful ambition is when our ambition is driven by our core wounds, and I'll tell you all about them. And purposeful ambition is when our ambition is coming from a place of wholeness, a place of truth. So there's 5 core wounds, and this is a body of work from Lise Bourbeau, who's a Canadian psychologist, and she talks about the wounds being rejection, abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. And for every wound we wear a corresponding mask. So for example, for the rejection wound, the mask we wear is avoidance. For the betrayal wound, the mask we wear is control. And then our ambition is coming from that mask. And you can imagine how wobbly that would get. But the reason that I wanted to use this language is that I like the word wound because it points to the original injury of the psyche, which everybody experiences, right? You could have the most magical parents on the planet, and I can't underscore this enough. And we'll still emerge from our formative years with core wounds, right? Whether they happen on the playground or vicariously. It's a very human rite of passage to have these wounds. And if we don't reconcile the pain in those wounds, they're going to drive our lives, and we'll call it fate, as Carl Jung would say.
I was talking with a colleague about the book, and we were talking about the choice of wounds as significantly, maybe not significantly, but notably different than trauma. And they're related but not interchangeable, I think.
Right.
Would you agree with that in terms of how we're talking about wounds as maybe having a potential for being healed, while trauma is something that maybe is a little more amorphous?
Yes. And also, the reason that I didn't use the word trauma too, well, they are different, but I'm not a therapist. And so I'm very careful to walk the line as well. I know where the clinical line is, right? But for me also, I noticed that with a lot of my clients, they don't identify with that word as much. So the word trauma, they feel like, okay, yes, I had these experiences, and maybe one would label them as traumatic, but I actually don't identify with that word in particular, though 70% of us will experience trauma in our lifetimes. And so it is really pervasive. But I just also felt like the word wounding was lower barriers to entry, if that makes sense.
Yeah. On that topic, and I always want to be very careful talking about this because we all come to this from a different perspective. But I want to talk a little bit about privilege. And one of the things that I think is always something to be discussed when we're talking about books that encourage us to make choices about our careers and to work on our mindset and set boundaries. That all of this can be very risky for people, regardless of where they are in their lives. But it can be particularly more risky for people who maybe don't have the financial stability or don't have the kind of support in their lives where they can put forth boundaries that are sort of authentic to themselves. How do you feel like this book is available to anyone, not just the executives that you coach, but anyone who is feeling the call of ambition, but doesn't quite know how to put that into play given their barriers?
Yes, I love this question. So I wrote this book for historically excluded people. So that's women, people of color, the LGBTQIA plus community, those lower on the socioeconomic ladder, immigrants, people with disabilities, because what I know and what I have watched is that our relationship to ambition is different. And so I mentioned the ambition penalty earlier on, right? But the wage gap across all of those identities too is wild. And so we all have varying levels of privilege, which means we all have varying levels of risks that we can take. So a lot of the time when people are giving career advice, they'll say, jump off the cliff, go do what you love. You'll never work a day in your life. And, those aphorisms don't land for a lot of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people don't have the financial safety net to jump off the cliff. A lot of people don't have the psychological safety inside of an organization to speak truth to power. And so we have to really acknowledge that we have varying levels of safety. Our identity matters. And so we have to be conscious of the levels of risk that we can take. And so I really tried to map out what I call like a crawl, walk, run approach, right? Of like, not all of us can I have a lot of privilege, economic privilege at this point in my career too, right? So I was able to take a risk on a second career that a lot of people can't take a risk on, like even coming to coaching at first, right? Just like being able to kind of go back almost 10 years in my career and start at the bottom. There was economic risk there and I had the privilege to do that. And so I hope I've mapped out a crawl, walk, run approach so it feels like there's something that you can take away. Like even in the conversation about zones of genius, this is a conversation of privilege too, right? Where the idea is that we all have a zone of genius. And if we work in there, basically we'll have a catalytic impact on the world. But so many people are working outside of their zone of genius because they have to pay their bills. So it's telling someone of like, just go find a job in your zone of genius. They're like, get off my face, lady, But one of the things I talk about in the book that comes from Gay Hendricks' work is start with just 10 minutes a day. Can you find 10 minutes a day to be in your zone of genius? What does that make possible for you? Okay, great. Now can we do 15? And can we build from there? So we're building that foundation and hopefully psychological safety and hopefully financial stability as we go.
So let's dig into the zone of genius. And I spent some time thinking about, as I was reading, how this is sort of a self-feeding practice, right? So believing that we have singular genius, depends on us practicing believing that we have singular genius, right? So let's talk about, for you in the book, what is genius, then what is the zone of genius, and then how does it serve us in terms of ambition?
I love this. One of the things that I noticed too is like having a front row seat to like all of these amazing humans that maybe had a lot of headwinds and a lot of core wounds, right? They had a challenging experience coming up in the world. And so many of them were discounting their genius. And I've been that person too. And I was like, okay, what is going on here? So again, I took to the research. And what I started to see was that, again, a lot of this is sort of systemic, that a lot of women feel like genius is a male trait. And it traces all the way back to ancient Rome, where genius was always a hero, never a heroine. And there was a study done by 92nd Street Y, and they found that little girls as young as 6 identified genius as a male trait, not a female trait, right? So there's a reclamation that needs to happen around genius. And the reason that I love this so much is that it democratizes genius, because we live in a world that's like, okay, genius is Einstein, it's this certain IQ, and that's actually not the truth, right? What IQ tests often indicate is motivation during test taking versus actual aptitude or intelligence. And we also live, have a school system that's designed for a particular thinker. And so we have all these types of genius in the world, but so many of us have been taught like, actually, that's not genius at all. So first and foremost, I wanted people to reclaim it. We all have it. We all have a space that we are just off the charts, genius, brilliant, where our magic is innate. We don't have to push or force or effort, but we have to give ourselves permission, and we have to start by spending some time there and starting to notice and the more time we spend there, the more confidence we build around the thing too. And we start to believe, oh, okay, actually I do have it. And maybe I can add a little more time there. And oh, I see the magic and the impact of that genius too. And so our zone of genius, this is a term that was coined by Gay Hendricks in his book, The Big Leap. And he actually blurbed the book, which was the thrill of a lifetime for me, because that work has been so profound in my life. But our zone of genius is the place that we're just off the charts brilliant. We don't have to push or force. That's our magic. And so in the book, there's an invitation for us to really allow our ambition to flow from those gifts, to flow from that zone of genius. Because what happens is we stop fighting with ourselves and we flow with the current of our gifts. And that's a much more generative experience.
That, I think, is, I wrote down the word irony. And I think that's just because, as you were talking, because we think that ambition should be hard. And I mean that in terms of, like, ambition should mean that we should push ourselves to the nth degree, that we should work on our weaknesses, and we should conquer all subjects and achieve all things, right? And what you're saying here is you chose the word flow. And that we need to find the genius that we all naturally have, which then makes it less painful to pursue our genius. And yet at the same time, we're all told that it shouldn't be easy.
Right. Exactly. And that's the part that I think we really have to throw away, right? Going back to what the first question you asked me was, how do you define ambition, or one of the first few questions? And culturally speaking, we think it's that more for more sake all the time. We have to hustle for it. It's a grind. It has to be hard. But I actually think ambition is softer. It's more flow, and it's much more like a perennial flower. So I have this diagram in the book where I illustrate what I think ambition looks like. And it is much more like a perennial flower. So you have a seedling of desire that you drop into the ground. I want to grow. I want to grow in this area in my career. I want to grow in my relationships. And then we take care of that inner and outer environment. And then the flower comes through the ground. And then it has this beautiful momentary peak in the sun where the petals are out and it's gorgeous. And then the seasons change and the petals fall off and it winds down and it goes back underground. And maybe it's fallow for a season until it nurtures that environment again and we take aim again. And so it is much more flow if we will allow it.
So here's a question for you based on that cycle is, I think we often also think that ambition needs to be progressive and always sort of doubling onto itself, right? And anytime we decide to stop, let's say we, achieve one goal, we achieve the goal of a lifetime, and then we're done, right? But that actually isn't the cycle, right? That we achieve something and then we have to choose whether to achieve another thing, or we have to choose whether to take a break, or we have to, so it's a much shorter, like, ambition doesn't just, I don't know how to say it, but it isn't the end point. That goal is not the end point. So how do you talk with people that you are coaching about valuing the achievement, but then also being okay to either make a decision to step away from it before you ever get there, or once you achieve something, say, yep, I did that, but now I don't have to do it forever. Like, I don't have to exhaust myself by being CEO of a company forever for the rest of my career. I can, in fact, make a different choice.
Yes, we have to really give ourselves permission to make a different choice. And I think it starts with redefining success for ourselves. Just even in the process of writing this book, I had to ask myself, Amina, what does success look like for you? And as someone who is highly ambitious and, has a propensity to, sometimes fall in the trap, I had to really be conscious of what success looked like for me. And so for me, early on, I said, I just want this this book to be somebody's favorite that's not my mom. So, it'd be very easy to be like, okay, I want to hit the bestseller list, and all of those things would be so lovely, right? But again, that's externalizing, that's that external validation, that's somebody else's measure versus my own. And so I thought, if I could just move one person deeply with this work, I will have done my job. Hopefully it's more than that, but so defining success for ourselves. And when we are traveling down the path and it starts to feel misaligned, checking back in and asking ourselves, like, is this connected to the truth of who I am? Is it really, checking the box on my gifts? Do I feel that sense of contentment? Are my needs met? I have this 5-part framework in the book. So really coming back to that 5-part framework. And one of the things that I talk about with my clients too is that we have to stop moving the goalpost, right? Because we get the milestone, then it's like we don't even take time to celebrate it. We go on to the next milestone. And so, one, from a dopamine perspective, that's not super healthy, but also we never feel satiated, right? Because actually what we're looking for is there's a wound on the inside that we haven't found the salve for yet. So there's no amount of, shiny objects, trophies, title bumps that are going to make you feel whole. It's work we have to do on the inside, which is laid out in this book. But added to that is I often find that we're on more of a spiral staircase anyway. So for like every next level of our life, sometimes I'll come back around and I'm like, didn't I work on this wound? And it's the same wound, just in a slightly different way and slightly more nuanced because I'm just one step up on the staircase. And so I think it's much more like a spiral staircase than it is anything else.
And I think that we forget sometimes when we're working on the self that circumstances change, right? And situations change and different external pressures where we have to practice those same improvements or the things that you've already worked on, but in a different scenario. So it doesn't solve it solving it in one scenario doesn't solve it in others, scenarios.
100%. We always have to growth mindset. I was talking to somebody recently and we were redefining success for them, and they hadn't consciously realized it, but the definition of success they'd set for themselves was basically their dad, who was wildly financially successful very early on, and then therefore got to be, home a lot with the kids. And so a very present dad as well. And we were just talking about how the market was so different 30 years ago than it is right now. And so, a lot of people right now can't buy homes, right? It's just a really different financial environment. And so growth mindsetting it to have the complete picture, I think, is also super important.
Yeah. I want to go back to, I have 2 more questions, and then we're going to move on to some questions that were pre-submitted by attendees. And again, if anybody has questions you'd like to drop into the comments, please do that. I also just want to mention that in Amina's book, she has exercises and other cooperative sort of personalized options for you to practice these and come to your own conclusions about what you need to work on and how you can help your own relationship with ambition. So definitely the book is where you can get the sort of practice in terms of figuring and working on this for yourself. Earlier, sorry, I've got too many questions now. Earlier, we were talking about a painful ambition versus a purposeful ambition. And I just want to make sure we spend a little time on what that solves, but then for us, but then also how purpose is such an essential to creating this big life for ourselves.
Yes. Would it be helpful for me to share kind of what goes into painful ambition and some of the hallmarks? Okay, great. So some of the hallmarks of painful ambition, and I'll tell you about purposeful too, but one thing I really want to invite people into when you're reading the book or if you're listening now is that it's not an all or nothing proposition. And we want to examine this through the lens of curiosity, not judgment, because I think sometimes there's a propensity to see frameworks like this and then weaponize them against ourselves and be like, I'm a mess and I'm doing everything wrong. Right. And so I just want to state that right now, like we're all doing our best. And this is an invitation for us to do a little bit better if we notice there's places where we want to kind of shore up our purposeful ambition. So some of the hallmarks of painful ambition are instrumentalizing our minds and bodies, a desire to win no matter the cost. And no matter the cost is really the operative phrase there, because there's nothing wrong with winning. But when we're willing to edge people out the way or hurt ourselves in the process, be uncomfortable. A narrow mindset, so black and white, either or thinking. moving at a sense of urgency, and toxic positivity. So those are some of the hallmarks. And then purposeful ambition, on the other hand, is instead of instrumentalizing our bodies, we're working in harmony with them. Instead of, being focused on winning no matter the cost and individualism, we're really focused on collaboration and supporting the community. And let's shine as a collective. I don't need to edge anybody out of the way. I actually think that scarcity is manufactured and, a tool of the oppressor, let's say. So, collaboration really is so much more supportive, an expansive mindset, moving at the speed of trust, and cultivating contentment instead of that toxic positivity. So those are some of the hallmarks.
Let's talk about a little, I think it's a useful place to stop, which is the word contentment. And that ambition is often driven by this desire for happiness, or what we assume will make us happy. And you talk more, you sort of make the distinction between happiness and, as those of us who are very interested in the topic and have explored it for some time, we realize that happiness isn't just, it's not because it's not achievable, but it's not lingering. And happiness is a feeling that we end up working past, like we end up moving through versus having. But contentment isn't about moving through, right? It's about sitting in it. Let me ask you if I got that right. But in terms of the book, how do you use contentment?
Yes, and I love this because this is one of my favorite conversations to be talking about now that the book is out, because so many people are short-circuiting around the idea that contentment and ambition could go hand in hand. But they're like, isn't ambition the opposite of contentment? But let me tell you, it's not. So in the West, we're obsessed with the idea of happiness. And, you go to Amazon and you'll see that there's 20,000 titles reporting to help us find this state, and that we could kind of hold on to it. But that's kind of the challenge, right? Because happiness is an emotion and is therefore transient. We're not meant to grip onto it, right? That's a bit of a fool's errand. But contentment, in Eastern traditions, it translates to unconditional wholeness or knowledge of enough. So this idea that internally we can cultivate this unconditional wholeness, this knowledge of enough. So whatever is happening externally, we have that inner stability. So it's not that we never get to feel happiness, right? Oftentimes when I'm teaching this, people are like, well, will I never get joy again? No, that's not the point, right? It's like, happiness is going to come and go. Anger is going to come and go. Grief is going to come and go. Joy is going to come and go. All of those things are welcome to come and go. And in the process, we also cultivate that unconditional wholeness, so that my whole life doesn't depend on happiness, because if it does, it's going to be highly up and down. And so our ambition does get to flow from that place, right? It's the idea that I can have a desire for more life. And I also know in this moment that this is enough, that I have that unconditional wholeness, that knowledge of enough.
I love the concept of contentment. It's definitely not one that I struggle with. I actually think that gives you a really warm feeling, like gives me a very warm feeling. But anyway, that's just my own response to that. But one of the things that I am really absorbed from the book is when you were discussing passive versus assertive energy. I bring this up because of contentment and people reacting to contentment as being sort of the antithesis of ambition. And I've always been fascinated in the question of what is enough, and how, when we realize that we are pushing against the immovable wall, and we decide to no longer push against the immovable wall, whatever that is, and in using the language that you use here, it might be different. But once we stop pushing against the immovable wall, are we giving up? And we think we're giving up. We think that we're being like, if only we were stronger, if only we were more determined, we would be able to continue pushing. And at some point, the dam would break, the wall would move, and it's up to us to make that happen. And that, to me, is, like you said, with painful ambition, it's a very much an either or, black and white, 100% or 0% sort of scenario, where if you stop pushing, then you now are failing, you're passive, you aren't trying. So can we talk a little about passive versus assertive energy, and how that's sort of the middle road, where there is a middle road between pushing pointlessly, but expecting yourself to do it, and being passive and thinking that can't coexist with ambition.
Yes, I love this question. The immovable wall, it's like I talk about like throwing our shoulder into the boulder that will never be able to up the hill, right? If it's not our wall, if it's not our boulder, it is not going to move. And so the invitation is to take action, right? I'm not saying that like we don't have to do anything and like life is just going to align and like we have to take action, right? We have to decide what we want for our lives. We have to take action around that thing and then also surrender. So surrender is, so if we're talking about the passive and the exerted energy, right? In Eastern traditions, they talk about the yin and the yang, right? The feminine and the masculine. The workforce that we or the way that we work is traditionally a bit more masculine, right? So that push force energy, like I'm gonna make things happen.
Right.
What I know from my own life and having a front row seat to watching all of these people is that energy doesn't always work, right? Sometimes we need it. We need that go-getter energy. And sometimes we have to soften and we have to surrender. And surrender does not mean give up whatsoever. When I first heard that word, I was like, what? Like we're giving up? We're not trying? We're not doing, how? It's simply a quiet receptivity. So we don't have to force or push. We're holding the intention. We've taken the actions. And now we're in the pause, that like quiet receptivity, that moment to allow for the magic around us to take action too. We don't always have to be the ones pushing and forcing. We get to receive as well.
I think that's a really good distinction in the sense that pushing against the boulder or the wall feels like an action, but it's not actually an action that gets you anywhere. So if you step back and surrender, say, I'm never moving that boulder or wall, then you can actually step to the side and take actions that actually do get you somewhere. And that in and of itself is more progressive than continuing to do something that is sort of, Sisyphusian in nature.
Yes. In nervous system work, we say decide, take action, observe, respond. So if you've decided about this thing that you want, you take an action. Let's say the action is trying to push this boulder up a hill. Well, observe. The boulder's not moving. We need to take a different action.
Right. Instead of, and then automatically going into judgment and saying, well, I'm a failure because I can't move the boulder.
Right. Like there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. And I think I've often used this as an example of my own personality, where if someone asked me to go lift a car, I would go try versus say, no, that's unreasonable, and or find someone else to move it. And I say that obviously figuratively, but I put so much pressure on myself to affect change on my own. And we're going to get to that actually as a question, but I have one more. I keep getting distracted. I have one more from me. And that is the other thing that I really absorbed and has really helped me from this book is the conversation about discipline and replacing discipline with devotion. And discipline is something that I continue to try to work through for myself. I have a lot of judgment around discipline. I have a lot of self-critique around discipline. If only I was more disciplined, I would X. If only I got up earlier in the morning, I would write my book. I would go to the gym. All of the if onlys based on some sort of framework that I think that someone else created that I think would, if I were disciplined enough, I could meet that expectation. Yeah. And you say that devotion is actually the way that you resolve your conflict with discipline. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I love this. This is like one of my favorite parts of the book.
So good.
Because I feel like in entrepreneurial organizations that I've been a part of, or just even in the work conversation, we're taught be disciplined. Disciplined is the gold standard. But discipline means to adhere to a set of like rules and standards. And that has always felt in violation of my true nature because I'm like, whose rules? Whose standards? Right? But devotion, if you look it up, the root word it's connected to is to be dedicated to a divine purpose, to be a student of divine purpose. And I think that that's just so much kinder and generous. So instead of us forcing ourselves to obey a set of codes and rules and behaviors that likely weren't designed to support our identities, can we instead be dedicated and students to a divine purpose? And our divine purpose, right? This is a very pedestrian example, but I think about, if I had to be disciplined around running every day, I would fail miserably. I am not a runner. I'm not designed for that, but I can be dedicated to something that feels a whole lot more aligned for me. I can be devoted to that. So for me, that looks like weightlifting is super fun for me, right? But I'm setting myself up for success because it's the thing that I want to be devoted to. And the same goes for our ambition and our purpose. Instead of forcing ourselves to be successful in somebody else's way, shape, or form, can we instead be dedicated to our purpose and our purposeful ambition, more devoted to that?
I have my own pedestrian example, and I play tennis and I love tennis. And for a good number of years, as an adult, I really wanted to achieve a certain ranking and or rating. And I have invested a lot of time, energy, money into becoming a better tennis player. And I've never achieved that rating that I wanted to hit because then I started getting injured and I wasn't able to play as much. And I've had to make a decision to actually play less, to enjoy it more. And the point to this is that I could be married to the discipline around I have to do X, Y, Z in order to achieve this thing that I want to achieve. Or I can appreciate and love the devotion I have put into becoming a better tennis player. And I think that resets your relationship with, it doesn't tell you that because you can't achieve that one thing, you shouldn't devote your time to it or you shouldn't try or be ambitious. It just means that it's the devotion itself. It's the effort itself. Another way of saying that, of course, we hear this a lot in athletic achievement, right? It's the process, not the result, because we can't guarantee what the result is. Exactly. And I think that, but using the word devotion and what we put into our pursuits is what matters, rather than whether we can whip ourselves into a frenzy to meet this expectation of time and effort.
Right. And it also brings us back to our why, right? Like when we're disciplining ourselves, well, why? But to be devoted, it anchors us back to that big why, to that purpose. And so we're always kind of in right relationship with our purposeful ambition because of why we're doing it.
Yeah. Okay. So we had a few submissions for questions. And as always, we could talk for hours. So we're going to do a few in these last 10 minutes. Nicole asks, as a person of color, female, and current university student, I struggle with the narrative that I must always be overworking myself to succeed in my career. How can we challenge that narrative for ourselves?
Yeah, I love this. I had to do my own work around my own internalized bias, right? It's tricky because some of the data that I shared initially is that women of color experience the most microaggressions in the workplace, regardless of being the most ambitious or because they are the most ambitious. And so we're up against that, right? And then also we internalize it and we tell ourselves that I'm both too much and not enough at the same time. And so because I'm too much, I need to dial this thing down. And because I'm not enough, I need to outwork. And so first and foremost, we have to look at our own stories, because my own stories were really getting in the way about what I thought was possible for a woman of color or a person with my identity in the workplace. So what are the stories that you're telling yourself about what's possible for you or what you have to do to succeed? What I would say to myself back in the day is that I have to be the first one in, the last one out. Doesn't matter if it's painful for me, just keep going. You have to show them that you're worthy and deserve to be here. And so what are the stories that you're telling yourself, and are they hurting or harming you? And that becomes a really great place to start. It doesn't mean that we are not going to experience microaggressions or bias inside of the workplace. We are likely to. But when we know what's ours and what's theirs, we're less likely to take what they're giving us and weaponize it against ourselves.
I was writing down that earning your worthiness is misplaced ambition.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Can we make that a t-shirt?
Exactly. And it's really basing everything off someone else. And Thank you, Nicole, for that question. There's so much more that we can dig into. In the book, you talk about how we sort of as ambitious people are often under the wrong assumption that we have to go it alone. And that community is essential for us, not only to achieve our dreams, but to do it in a healthy way. And Maureen asks for advice for solo creators. And I think that ties into what you're saying about community and this misunderstanding of what being solo really is.
Yes, this is so important. We see I've talked about this extensively in the book writing process, because when I first, came to authorship, I thought, well, everyone just does everything by themselves. And what I'm seeing from this journey is like, this is the journey of like 100 people, right? There's so many of us that are in this book, not just me. And I wouldn't have been able to do it if it weren't for all of these people. In fact, if I focused on the individualism, I would have risked greater injury, and it wouldn't be the beautiful work product that it is, right? Collaboration is so important, but it is challenging when we are solopreneurs, individual contributors. And so for that, I would say really look for your community spaces. When I first became an entrepreneur, the first year was really lonely, and it got to the point where I was like, I really need community. Like I'm getting strange over here by myself. And so I started to look for the co-working spaces, the community groups that were values aligned with me. So I found these like amazing co-working spaces for people of color, for women, etc. And then I found like this amazing group of humans that are my friends to this day. And they've been so in the process with me. So they might not work in my business with me, but we're in this together because we're part of a community together. So when their book comes out, I'm there and I'm writing the reviews, and I'm at the event, and they're on my podcast, all the things. And same for me. And it makes us feel part of a larger system, even if we are an individual contributor or a solopreneur.
I think this idea that obviously it is part of our sort of national identity to think that the individual is all. But in actuality, and I think you say this well in the book, that your community is where you can practice your applying your genius, where you can practice your purpose, and then you can take it out into the world. And so it's really important, even for solo creators, to share their work with their, however small the community is, in order to build up that access into a larger group.
Yes. I referenced Brittany Pecknett Cunningham's TED Talk on confidence. It's so beautiful. You all go watch it, listen to it. But she talks about how confidence needs permission to exist. Community is the safest place to try it on, and curiosity affirms it. And so if we want to live these beautiful, purposefully ambitious lives, we need to feel like we're connected to our gifts, but we need psychological safety for that. And these community spaces are the places for us to practice that and try it on. So thank you for putting a bow on that for me, Sally.
As we've already talked about, health is a big, important part of this book, but it's also a big part of your life. And one of our attendees submitted the question, as a person with an autoimmune disease, lupus, how do you find that get up and go feeling?
Okay, that's a very complicated question, right? Because there's so many pieces that go into that, right? From our self-care to our health practices, making sure that we have the right practitioners supporting us, and then also the places that we're working in. And I'll just speak from my own experience. What I know for me is that there's so much seasonality to it, and there's so many factors that go into it. And so, I have Hashimoto's, for example, and there's a seasonal component to it. So winter, for example, is a little more challenging for me. It's harder for my body to generate ATP, to have more energy. And so then, and this is a form of privilege too, because I have my own company, I will adjust my work schedule so that I could sleep a little bit more in the winter, or I'll bring in some more self-care practices. And so I think we have to be really conscious of our bodies and how they work and how they flow. An exercise that I have in the book and also on my website is how to design your ideal work week around your body. Because first of all, I think it's actually something that all of us should be doing if we have chronic illness or not, because not everybody's body works the same every day, especially if we have chronic illness. And so my invitation for you would be to start noticing where and when do you have the most energy? Who are you surrounded by? What are you doing? What's the context? What conditions are in place, and what's happening when you don't have very much energy, and what can we do to work with your body versus working against it, and also to recreate the conditions where you do have energy. So I'll say one last thing on that. When I was writing the book, what I noticed about my own brain is that I have more energy and I think more clearly at the beginning of the week and early in the day. So I would write on those days. And then coaching is a zone of genius for me. So I would do that on Wednesday, Thursday, because it doesn't require that much energy. And by Friday, I was like, I barely know my name. So this is admin day.
Thank you for giving that example. I think that helps us apply some of the things that we've been talking about and how you actually apply them to your circumstances and your conditions and how you want to balance your relationship with ambition and with in cooperation with your body. Mm-hmm. And just those little things that can let us understand that we aren't always at the will of the river and being sort of carried away with the pace of the river, that we can at times figure out ways around sort of being swept away.
Yes. Can I add one more thing to that? Remind me of it. I talk about this in the book too, but when I often share this curriculum around designing your ideal work week around your body with people, they'll say, well, I can't really do that in corporate. But there are ways that we can find pockets in our schedule to have a bit of freedom in the framework. And so I give some examples in the book of like, if there's pockets you can carve out on your calendar and work within those pockets, even that can give you a bit more flow, a bit more energy.
Yeah. We have 3 minutes left. It's incredible. But so I'm going to combine the last two questions here. This book very much speaks to those of us who have been striving for years and perhaps have become exhausted or trying to make peace with our ambitions and what we've accomplished. But it also very much is a book that would make a great graduation gift, because it's for people who are starting out in the workplace and not, or in the workforce, and not getting exhausted from the beginning or setting up ourselves for failure because of those kinds of ambitions. And so I have two questions here that sort of relate to that. For young people who have so much that they want to achieve and they have multiple ambitions, mm-hmm. How do they choose what to pursue? And then we have Wendy, and you were on Wendy's podcast. She lets us know.
Hi, Wendy.
She says, as someone who's been on her own midlife reinvention journey, how have you seen a shift for women in midlife around ambition and purpose? And I'm sort of challenging you to take both of those questions about, for a young person who has multiple ambitions, how do you choose that? So you're sort of not getting to middle age where you are either judging how you've gotten to where you're going, or you're starting new at that age.
Yes, beautiful. And I think I can answer this in one way.
Right.
So in the book, there's this 5-part framework that we build our purposeful ambition from. And it becomes a litmus test that we weigh every opportunity against. So when it comes to where there's multiple things that we're passionate about, that we want to be ambitious about, we'll take it through this framework and say, well, which one do I prioritize? So we ask ourselves, is this connected to my gifts? Is it connected to the impact that I want to have? Is it values aligned? Are my needs met? And does it cultivate contentment? And there will be one that rises to the top. And that's the thing that we lean into for this particular season. And then we keep checking in with ourselves. And for people in midlife, it's the same litmus test, because, Hi, Wendy, I'm so happy you're here. One of the things that happens is I work with a lot of people that have gotten to the top of their mountain in their career at that midlife moment, and they look around and they realize this isn't it, because they followed somebody else's idea of success and what made somebody else happy. And they're finally having that moment where they come home to themselves and they want to build from the truth of who they are. And again, we use that 5-part framework of like, does this tap into my gifts? Is it values aligned? Is it the impact I want to have? Are my needs met? And can I cultivate that sense of contentment from this place?
Fantastic. That was a great dovetail of those two questions. And I can't thank you enough for being here. I'm so pleased that we had this conversation. I think that this book obviously comes from a place of purpose for you, and just what a wonderful accomplishment that is. And I can't wait. I am curious, actually. I'll just ask you the question instead. As an ambitious person and having accomplished writing the book, what's next for you?
So I think about, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I want to talk to you for hours about tennis. I also am a tennis fan, hence the Serena Williams stories throughout the book. We actually had to cut them out because I'm, too sweet on Serena that it was taking up too many pages. But anyway, for me, I think, this is sort of when I think about the ambition framework and the perennial flower, this is that peak moment in the sun, right? The petals are out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm probably going to go back underground and take some rest and really pace and nourish myself before I decide what I'm going to take aim towards again.
And again, I think that's such a great way of communicating to us, not only what you share in the book, but that you apply these yourself, and that resting is not passive, but actually just shores up your energy in order for you to achieve the next thing that you're striving for. And I think all of us can find some contentment in that practice of allowing ourselves to accept the seasonality and accept maybe where we need to set our boundaries. And this book is going to help us do that. And I'm so appreciative. I hope everyone loves it. Everyone will love it when they get it. If anyone wants to order it, please do. Please visit Amina at her website. And I'm sure you are going to do other interviews, and people can follow your work elsewhere.
Thank you so much for having me, Sally. This has been amazing. Such a fun conversation. And
thank you so grateful to I'm really sad it's over.
I know, me too. Yeah. Experiencing a little grief. I'm like, let's stay here.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure everyone who's watched is so thankful for spending time with you. And we will talk again in the future with that next book, maybe.